This is a Dhammanet presentation.
So for this afternoon we'll do some Metta meditation, some loving kindness, and we'll do loving kindness meditation. We'll do just the beginning steps of that. And like all meditations, meditation on loving kindness is a very profound practice. So we don't expect to be able to master it just in a short session, even in a retreat or even in many years of practice. These things are very subtle. So for this afternoon, we'll just do loving kindness for oneself and for a loved person. 2 people. Okay? We have this idea in, I guess, in religion or in when we like to think nice thoughts. We think that we should love everybody. And one of the peculiarities of our world is that we all imagine that it's a good thing to love everybody. And yet we live in a world where there seems to be so much hate. And we're just reading the news today, and new wars erupting again in Iraq. And it seems like there's something wrong with us as a species. Why is it that we put so much effort, so much money, so much time, so much thought into devising more and more ways to hurt each other? There's just something wrong with that. There's something wrong with the world which imagines that having lots of guns means security. And then we're always surprised when we turn around, oh, someone used those guns and they hurt somebody. Really? So the Buddha said all those years ago that this is not the way to security. And you don't get safety by having more guns, having a bigger army, having more drones. And it seems like that we're sort of moving ever faster into a future where these kinds of things become more and more powerful and more scary. It's very interesting that there was, when we look at the life of the Buddha, that the story that we most hear about the life of the Buddha is that he went forth. He decided to become a monk after he lived a very sheltered life in the palace, and then he went out from the palace and saw the signs of old age, sickness and death. But like every story, there's always another way of looking at it. And one of the interesting little suttas we find tucked away in the Sutta Nipata, one of the small collections of Buddhist suttas. And in the Sutta Nipata, in a collection called the Attaka collection, which is regarded by scholars as being among the very earliest portions of the whole Buddhist canon, we find a little text called the Attadanda Sutta, and a text which is, to my knowledge, almost completely ignored by the Buddhist tradition. And that sutta just gives a few verses where the Buddha says, this is why I went forth, this is why I became a monk. And he gives a quite different story. It's not necessarily, incompatible or contradictory story, but it's a different perspective on things. And he said that he looked at the world which had, where the word attadanda literally means having picked up weapons. And so this world which has embraced violence, where everywhere everywhere he looked, he saw people opposing each other, living in enmity to each other. Anyamanyang vyarudhe. And he saw people, he said, if I can use the word, like flopping around like a fish in too little water. Mache apodake yata. And so no matter where he looked in the world, he couldn't find any place of security. Couldn't find any place of safety. So he began to wonder, why is this? What's the reason? And of course, when you look at how people answer that question, people usually satisfied with very shallow answers. Right? People will say, it's because of their skin colour. It's because they have a different language to us. It's because they have a different religion to us. They're different, they're other, and because they're other, they're less. And they're not as civilized as us, they're not as... Which of course omits the fact that we get involved in these things just as much as anybody else. So if you sort of go beyond that kind of the worst kind of blaming for these conflicts, then you sort of get down to the next level of understanding, which is a bit more realistic. So you understand in terms of political conflicts, in terms of different social values, in terms of economic needs, right? Certain people have economic interests and so on and so forth. And these, of course, are some of the things that drive conflict. But even those things are somewhat somewhat misleading. I mean, it is true, of course, that these things contribute to conflicts, but it's also true that there are plenty of people in the world who have different economic needs, right? And they manage to resolve these things without going to war about it. There's plenty of people in the world who have political differences and who manage to deal with those political differences without going to war. Yeah? So just to point to those things alone is not really sufficient. So when we come deeper and deeper and look into the causes of this conflict, and the Buddha, or the then Bodhisattva, this was before he was enlightened, said that he was looking for the cause, and he found the cause nestled deep in his heart. Yeah, the Pali phrase is Hadaya Nisita. And so it's like he said it's like an arrow stuck in his heart. So it's at this point that you stop blaming others. And it's at this point that you stop looking for some kind of explanation in terms of politics and economics and all of those kinds of things. And you start to realize that actually the underlying cause of all of these things exist in our own hearts. And those things that live in our hearts are common to all of us, because we're all people, we're all human beings, even all sentient beings. So that even though we are different because of various external things, because of age or gender or skin colour or language or background or tradition or culture or economics and politics and all of these things, football teams, cricket teams, all of those things make us different, but what's in our hearts is always the same. At least the same general principles. Of course, the details are different. And what are those things? Well, according to Buddhism, those things, greed, hatred, and delusion, of course. And they're opposites. The lack of greed, lack of hatred, and lack of delusion. Or they're positive outcomes. The opposite of greed is giving and generosity. The opposite of hatred, loving kindness. The opposite of delusion is wisdom. So people who have those things, lots of greed, lots of hatred, lots of delusion, then they'll tend to get involved in those kinds of conflicts. You can see that on it's a Saturday today, so you can go to the pub tonight, and around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in any pub in Sydney, you can probably see these things playing out. Lots of greed, hatred and delusion, and people getting in fights and so on. But people who don't have greed, don't have hatred, don't have delusion, what have you got to fight about? Why would you want to get in a fight with anybody? One time the Buddha said, I don't argue with the world argues with me. So the Buddha's not about going to try and picking fights with people. But some people have problems with the things that the Buddha did or that he said. Because when you start to point to these kinds of things, you start to understand where it is that human conflict and human problems come from, then that's very threatening, it's very undermining. Because it suggests that rather than solving our problems by having bigger armies and invading countries and dropping bombs and all of those kinds of things, we should be solving our problems by hating less. As it says in the Dhammapada, that hatred is never overcome by hatred, it's only overcome by love. And of course we've seen such a terrible example of this in the last decade or so, since 9/11. And a terrible act of terrorism. So many people died. And the response to it is hate. Let's go invade a country, let's go and drop some bombs, let's go kill more thousands, more tens of thousands, more hundreds of thousands, millions of people dead, injured, driven out of their homes. And what's the outcome of that? Another war. That's what we do. So this cycle will only ever be broken when somebody has the guts to stop. When somebody has the guts to actually stand up and say, let us forgive. We have become so used to these things that we don't even see it as ironic anymore. Nobody even comments that it's ironic that for example, America and Australia are supposed to be Christian countries. What did Jesus say? Turn the other cheek. Love your enemy. That's what Jesus said. And it's not even a question about whether we're going to actually follow those principles or not. Yeah? It's not even a part of any public debate. No, there's not a single one of all the Christian politicians in the world that ever stands up and says, let us actually practice these things that Jesus taught. And so here we go into another spiral. Right? Another war, more bombs, more killing, more death. And of course the outcome of that will be that everybody in Iraq will love us. Thank you, they will say. Please, we want more depleted uranium shells littering our countryside. We want more of our children to have their limbs blown off by landmines. You did such a great job last time. Please come back. So this is not the way to solve problems. This is the way that cowards use. These cowards hide behind the weapons and the guns and things, and if you've got bigger guns, you can always shoot people. But what takes real guts is to be able to love and to forgive, because that takes vulnerability. Right? That takes an acceptance that maybe there's wrong on both sides. Yeah? You can't have forgiveness if you're always just blaming the other. If you want to have real forgiveness, you have to say, maybe I was part of this problem as well. So if we want to try to break this cycle, we have to start by saying, is it possible, amidst all of this hatred, to be able to love? We have to admit that all of these problems which we see that our world getting into, and the different conflicts and things like that, that the same roots of those problems exist within ourselves. And that if we want to change, we can. There's nothing mysterious about this. Okay? It's perfectly rational. We want to have less hatred, we develop loving kindness. Very, very simple. Right? It's not understanding which is the problem, right? Understanding is very simple. What takes a problem is having the courage to really do it. And to be very, very persistent and very honest with yourself. How am I actually responding? So even though we have all of these good ideas, they're not much use unless we have a way of putting them into practice. Of course, this is always the problem, isn't it? We can have the idea that smoking is bad, but that doesn't really help us to be able to give up the habit. And what we need is a way of being able to actually give up the habit of hatred. And that's what metta meditation is all about. That's what loving kindness meditation is for. We've got into these bad habits. Let's do something about it. Okay? So one of the first things we have to do when we're practicing loving kindness is to be able to have love for ourselves. To be able to accept ourselves. And this is so important. If we can't love ourselves, we still have all of these tensions and conflicts and so on inside us, and we can't stand to become aware of that. We can't stand to know that. We can't stand to be with that. And so we externalize it, we project it. That's what the human mind does. All of this stuff that we can't stand inside ourselves, we project outside to the other. So the first thing we have to do is to accept, hang on, it's okay, I can love myself. With all my flaws, with all of my bad thoughts, with all of my mistakes, with all of my ridiculous stupidness. It's okay. You don't love somebody because they're perfect. No? Yeah? You don't love someone because they're perfect. We love because people are in pain, because they're imperfect. Perfect people don't need your love. So you love yourself with all of your imperfections. And whenever you're doing that meditation and you feel self-doubt, you say, oh, but I did this and I did that. And you say to yourself, yes, you did that. And that was bad. You're a bad person and I love you anyway. Don't try to get rid of the doubts. But you don't give them any power. Doubting is not a source of power and strength. Love is a source of power and strength. So you just love. And so for this afternoon's meditation, as well as doing that love for oneself, you'll also do it for somebody, a loved person, somebody that's close to us. So for the purposes of the meditation, you choose one person who we love. It doesn't have to be everybody. Never mind, you can do everybody else later on. Just one person. And we bring them to mind, we hold them in our mind, until we can't see any difference between the love that we have for ourselves and the love we have for a loved person. And when we can do this, then there's a lot more in this meditation. There's much to go from there, but that's enough for just this afternoon. But the most important part of the Metta meditation is the feeling. And what Metta is, what love is, really is a feeling. It's not an idea. So we have to move from having the idea of loving kindness to having the experience of loving kindness. And it's that experience of loving kindness that really, at a deep level, undercuts those roots of hatred. Okay, so let's do some meditation for the next 30 minutes.